I never thought a garage could feel like the last piece of country I owned, until the night someone tried to burn it down. It was almost midnight, the air that makes you pull your jacket tight, and the alarm screaming felt too honest to ignore. By the time I was on the porch, there were boots on my gravel and a woman with a clipboard and a flashlight beam. She looked like she thought she owned everything between the maples. My name's Tommy Ellis. I grew up where the houses spread out like good fences, and the trees did most of the talking. My garage is my workshop, my dad's tools, the place I built a table that still leans a little, and a dog named Hank who snores like a human. That's where it began, small things that felt private until they weren't. Across the lane lives Evelyn Pierce. Perfect hair, perfect shirts, clipboard like a badge. She's vice president of the Homeowners Association, and she had an appetite for rules the way some folks pray. She would show up with a smile and a piece of paper that said violation, and there was a satisfaction to her voice that made you think this was more than order, it was a performance. At first it was petty. Notices about my gravel, the height of a birdhouse, lights that offended someone's idea of tidy. I kept a camera on the corner and notes in a notebook, because losing your temper doesn't fix things and evidence sometimes does. Then the visits got stranger, locks tampered with, a truck idling across the lane in the middle of the night, a man lingering who'd later be linked to someone Evelyn had hired to assess compliance. The thing about small towns is how quickly the board can feel like a courtroom. They called a hearing, and we all sat in that community room with paper coffee cups and faces that had practiced neutrality. I walked in with timestamps, motion clips, and a lawyer who'd agreed to work with me because this was about more than a light bulb or a birdhouse. Evelyn spoke like accusation was a hobby, soft, precise, and certain she was right. When I played the footage, there was no drama, just sequence. Evelyn at my garage with the man she'd brought, the man circling the shed, a hand near a matchbox. People leaned forward the way people do when a story finally lines up with what they suspected. A few listeners who'd attended her tea parties looked away. The board ruled in my favor that night, and for a minute it felt like the right thing had happened. After the ruling, I expected calm. I got escalation. Evelyn's smile hardened into resolve. She started leaving anonymous flyers and posting in the neighborhood group, suggesting my property was unsafe, an eyesore. She cornered a couple of neighbors, Mrs. Duran, who owns the corner house and bakes pies for charity, and Marcus, who runs the hardware store, and convinced them there was a liability issue. Marcus, who had always waved, stopped coming by for coffee. There was one night I saw her across the street, and I went to her, because I wasn't looking to burn bridges. Evelyn, I said, we can sort this out, tell me what you need. She looked at me, folding that clipboard like a fan, and said, Tommy, this isn't personal. It's about standards. I tried to keep my voice steady. Standards don't need to be cruel. She smiled in the way someone smiles before they close a door. Some people need structure, she said. Some people need boundaries. The line between structure and control started to blur. Then came the arson attempt. The camera caught a masked figure under a hood moving toward the bench with something that could have become a nightmare. I found the scorched spirit of a hammer where my toolbox used to sit. I remember the police officer, Officer Lane, saying, we'll get to the bottom of this, and the comfort in his voice felt small and human. The investigation wasn't cinematic, lots of phone calls, a DMV check that led to a renter who'd received money from an account traced to Evelyn's associates. I don't want to make Evelyn into a cartoon. Her motives were complicated: control and a genuine belief that she was improving the neighborhood, mixed with personal grievances about a fence and a property line that had irritated her for years. She had influence and she used it, and when that didn't work, she weaponized the tools she had. Notices, gossip, hired hands. It's an ugly ladder, and people often climb it without noticing they're higher than the rest. The court process was dry and slow and, frankly, educational. Bank transfers, receipts for cash withdrawals, text messages with scheduling details, these bureaucratic breadcrumbs built a case. I sat many mornings in a tiny room with a coffee gone cold, reading deposit slips like a man reading scripture. When the district attorney presented the ledger in court, it felt almost anticlimactic, like facts have this way of doing the heavy lifting while our emotions get to perform. Evelyn was charged with harassment and conspiracy. The trial wasn't a TV show, there was no dramatic confession, but there were enough inconsistencies in her story to crack the veneer. The jury took its time, and when the verdict came, the room exhaled. She got community service and restrictions on her role in any association. It wasn't perfect, but it was a sentence that fit the sort of harm she had caused. The hardest part was the social weather afterward. Some neighbors rallied around me, bringing casseroles, sitting on my porch, and talking about something other than bylaws. Others kept their distance, embarrassed or pragmatic. I had to know both sides, they'd say. Evelyn's supporters whispered about overreach and villainization. The town gossip churned. But slowly, the HOA changed its charter. They added transparency on inspections, rotating board membership, and a clause that disallowed anonymous complaints from leading straight to fines without verification. There was an open garage night months Laterno pomp, just lights strung over my workbench like lazy stars. Marcus brought reclaimed wood and a new set of clamps. Mrs. Duran brought pecan bars. A couple of folks who'd been quiet all year pulled up a stool. We showed each other projects, swapped stories, and someone joked that my table still wobbled and offered to plane the leg. Those small acts felt like stitches. I learned things I didn't want to have to learn. I learned how fragile community trust is, how quickly a persuasive voice can redraw the map of normal. I learned to listen for motives, what people stand to gain when they insist something be a certain way. I learned that evidence is patient, and that bureaucracy, for all its tedium, can be a kind of justice. I also learned about the people who choose to help, the clerk copying files at midnight, the neighbor who sat with me when the air felt too heavy, the detective who treated the case like it mattered long after most folks had moved on. If you live in a place with an HOA or any group that promises to keep order, remember that order without accountability is just structure for someone else's power. Rules should protect people, not be used as a mechanism to control or humiliate. After what happened, the HOA rewrote parts of its charter: more transparency on inspections, rotating board membership, and a clause to prevent anonymous complaints from turning into fines without verification. Those changes mattered, but they were small and practical, and they helped. The real work was cultural neighbors getting comfortable saying, "That went too far," or "I need to hear why." I think about my dad a lot through all of this. He taught me how to sand without rushing, how to make a joint so it meets square. He also taught me how to stand my ground without turning a fist into a grudge. I wasn't proud of every choice I made during the fight. There were nights I wanted to shout and nights I wanted to walk away. Over time, I tried to live by his lesson. Do the work, fix what's broken, forgive what you can, and keep your porch light on for the neighbor who returns late. Maybe that's the smallest form of civic courage, being visible and consistent. So that's the story of a garage, a clipboard, and how a small community nearly let a single voice redraw the map. I'm not here to tell you how to live, just to tell you to notice and to act when rules become weapons. What do you do when the person enforcing the rules seems to enjoy it a little too much? How would you respond if your own sanctuary was targeted? Drop a comment, tell me your story about neighborhood fights or small victories. Tell me whether you think the HOA did the right thing, and if you've ever had to gather evidence to prove you were telling the truth. If this story hit you, share it with someone who's been in that fight. And hey, if you build a table that wobbles, let me know. I'll give you the trick my dad showed me.